So welcome to the Kigali Global Dialogue 2023 and to the session of the Live at Kigali in the studio devoted to urban futures. So let's start our discussion. I'm delighted to have be together with two champions of issues linked with our urban futures, be it digitalizations, be it partnerships, with Honorary Gerville, Jinky, Bitrics, Luistro, a Congresswoman from the Philippines. Welcome. And Deborah Lam, Founding Executive Director, Partnerships for Inclusive Innovation from the US. Welcome, Deborah. Shall I call you Gerville? Is it okay?
Yes, Gerville.
Gerville. So Deborah and Gerville. I'm myself, Nicolas Bouchou. I'm from Paris, France, chair of the Grand Paris Alliance, a think tank on infrastructure investments and also advisor to the Asian Development Bank Institute. So when we were advised that we could have this conversation about urban futures, I was delighted because sometimes in global dialogues, there is only a few part that is devoted to urban futures, or it is only about urban and urbanizations, and part of global dialogue and perspectives are a bit forgotten. So maybe Gerville, to start with you. I know you are a champion of inclusion, digitalization, and by being a member of the parliament, you are also part of a vibrant political scene in the Philippines. How do you see digitalization and inclusion being part of a better urban future, especially after the COVID-19?
Well, of course, digitalization is the trend of the present economy, and we describe it as a mode of improving the productivity with reduced management and labor issues. However, it must be appreciated as well as a labor struggle, because the companies who are labor-driven will become technology-driven, thus reducing the number of employees who will be taken in by the company for employment. It means that the company who used to rely or depend on labor will now be depending on the utilization of technology in terms of production. Thus, it will displace the huge number of employees, leaving them unemployed or underemployed, and creating the issue more on the informal sector, which is one of the issues confronting our growing economy.
I remember when there was the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns that were ensuing in spring 2020 and the follow-up. There were many comments about, oh, this is the end of urbanization as we know it, or this is the end of this and that, or this is the end of urban models. Deborah, you are from the US, but also with the global reach. You're working on partnerships and innovation. If you look at the midterm, long-term impacts of the COVID on a number of major US cities, it does have an impact on the downtowns and on the attractivity of the office market and etc. That's one thing, but how would you describe the landscape, the post-COVID landscape regarding partnerships for innovation and this urban component in the behind?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Thank you for having me. First, I don't think we're entirely there in the post-COVID landscape. I think it's still an ongoing evolution, but we have already started to see some of the effects of COVID, and what you're referring to is the future of work. Obviously, the most immediate effect was that it really impacted frontline workers and those that were, had the luxury or the benefits to actually work from home because, one, they had the technology, the skill sets. Two, they had the accessibility, with broadband, wireless. And three, they could do that type of work. So there was a clear division in labor. So that was one. The second division that resulted was those that could afford to work remotely, they chose to leave and work somewhere else. So you had the luxury to work anywhere. And I would say there was a trickle from the urban core because of affordability, because of lifestyle, because of culture, and they chose to live anywhere. So there was a huge decentralization of that, and we're still feeling those effects in terms of hybrid working and, if they want to stay for the long term. But I think the third issue that we also saw was more societal, impact on families. So who could actually do that? We saw a huge disproportional impact on women, particularly in childcare, because they had huge numbers that left the labor force because they could not afford the childcare, because they had different needs, et cetera. And many of those did not come back yet. And so there's a lot of divisions that we're still feeling, and companies and cities and governments all over are still trying to reconcile what this new landscape would be that would address some of these inequalities that have resulted.
Gerville, the situation which you describe in the Philippines, right? Would it be for the Metro Manila situation or for all of cities, or would it be specific to the major cities that are sort of well-equipped and interconnected? But what about the second and third-tier cities? Is the reality you are describing about the impacts of digitalization on work and the multiple impacts on livelihoods and life, just focusing on the megacity of the Philippines, or is it something that is countrywide?
I must say that the impact of digitalization is countrywide because it will be affecting the employees across the country, especially the employees who are not using technology in terms of their employment, the companies who are not depending on the advanced technology in terms of productivity. The moment they convert their mode of productivity into the use of advanced technology, that is the time that the employees will be displaced, and the issue of informal sector will be confronting all of us. And it is in this light as well that I wish to call the attention of the international community that perhaps we need to support international and regional dialogues like the Kigali Global Dialogue in order to address the adverse impact. Although I understand there is a positive impact of digitalization, but there are as well negative impacts in terms of the employability of the people. And the measures that I see, one is perhaps we can adopt the skill building, teach and educate the people in the use of technology so that they will be continually employable in the companies where they are at, or perhaps in the other companies. And second, of course, we can consider the green financing, which has been being advocated by the international communities as a way of creating or providing a new industry for the informal sectors where they can work with.
So we will get back to that and the sort of how to answer the call from a regional or a global perspective, maybe differently in Africa or in the ASEAN context and so on. But same question to both of you, Deborah and Gerville. I would say pre-COVID, right? We were sort of living with this impression that thriving urban cores meant startups and the kind of tech youth, right, that would go here, find a co-working place, or reinvestigate locations a little bit far from the center, but with that spirit. And in short, innovation, urbanization, a startup economy, ability to shape and drive the future, this kind of tech optimism, right? Everything was there in cities. A few years later, I'm not so sure this landscape is still the same. How would you view the evolution of the situation, let's say, by 2030, for instance, by the end of this cycle of the 2030 agenda? How can these factors who have been sort of disconnected, should they be reconciled, or the transformation of digitalization that have been accelerating are too powerful? How do you view the evolution of the situation? Maybe Deborah?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say I still believe in cities. Cities are still, at its core, very important. And the reason why I say that is that fundamentally you have a concentration of resources, of sustainability issues that, make it more efficient, more effective, culture, the collision of innovations and energy, et cetera. So for all the reasons why cities work, that's true. You are right to say that there are a lot of negative consequences in terms of how we've traditionally built cities, particularly in terms of the environment, in terms of how we've, divided ourselves in terms of equity. What I see COVID doing, though, it's actually been able to rise a bunch of second, third tier cities in a way that they haven't. So whereas before you have, a few postcard cities, right? Your London, your San Francisco, your Paris, and that's great. But actually what this has done is give a whole rise of other cities that might have been in the periphery or in the second or third tier, but because they can provide the same conveniences, because they have the same digital infrastructure, because they have a more affordability and different cultures, then you can see a spread or a diffusion of many more cities coming together. And I think that's actually very good. It's very exciting. You don't have to have one concentrated urban core mega city. You can actually have a slew of additional cities all working together towards this. And it's still not going to solve everything, but it does decrease the concentration.
Gerville, you are describing these very powerful forces of digitalization, right, which have been exponentially augmented during the or in sync with the COVID-19 pandemic to maintain supply chains, etc., as something that seems to be overwhelming a bit. To answer your question about how to manage that, would that be through partnerships between national or federal government and metro or local authorities? Would that be through, for example, regulations coming from the ASEAN? How could this rebalancing come from?
Well, I wish to suggest that we need first to appreciate labor as an important element of food and service productivity. They must be considered as a special type of capital and investment, and therefore the informal sector needs to be institutionalized and to maintain proper balance as to the negative and the positive impact of digitalization. I humbly recommend that, first of all, we support regional and international dialogues, come up with international policies similar to Paris Agreement and the Sendai Agreement. And second, anchoring on these international policies, the countries around the world can come up with their own legislation supporting the positive impact of digitalization while coming up also with the interventions with respect to its negative impact. And for the third, I wish to advocate also the strong coordination between the government and the labor sector involved. There must be a proper coordination in order to ensure that there is correct monitoring, tabulating, and locating of these informal workers in order that the necessary measures may be undertaken to maintain the proper balance. And finally, the digitization scheme must be utilized in its maximum potential while we are addressing the social protection programs that needs to be implemented with respect to the employees who could not adapt to the demands of the digitalization.
Yes, thank you very much, both of you, because I think by insisting on the factor labor as critical for urban futures, this is replacing it a little bit at the center, whereas before the COVID, we have tended to forget a little bit about that. Like urbanization would be just a result of free flow finance and trade, but this is extremely important. Thank you very much, both of you, Gerville from the Parliament of the Philippines and Deborah for partnerships of innovation in the USA. I think there are factors of hope. There will be, in a few times from now, discussions about SDG 11, at the high-level political forum in New York, so that would be an opportunity to push different views of urbanization, and of course the continuation of such dialogues, and the G20 offers also opportunities to do so. Thank you very much.